Marlowe Bishop was pouring water into a crystal glass when Weston Ashcombe's hand began to shake. It was a small thing. A tilt of her collar as she leaned across the table. A mark on the side of her neck, pale and crescent-shaped, half hidden beneath a loose strand of hair. He had seen that mark once before. On the worst night of his life. On someone the entire family had buried 22 years ago. Dad. Presley Ashcombe's voice cut through the dining room. You're staring at the help. Weston didn't answer. His wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the hardwood. Marlowe knelt immediately, reaching for the broken glass with a dish towel. I'm so sorry, sir, let me. Don't, Weston said. His voice came out wrong. Too quiet. Too tight. Marlowe, that's enough. Go, Presley snapped. Marlowe left, cheeks burning. Weston sat frozen at the head of his own table, staring at the space where she'd been standing, and for the first time in over 2 decades, allowed himself to think a sentence he had spent 22 years refusing to think. What if we buried the wrong story? Months earlier. Marlowe Bishop grew up in a 2-bedroom rental above a laundromat in New Haven, Connecticut, raised by a grandmother who never once complained about the noise from the dryers below or the fact that she was raising a child alone in her 60s. Odessa Bishop wasn't warm in the way people expect grandmothers to be warm. She didn't bake, didn't coo. She worked 2 cleaning jobs until her knees gave out, and she was, by Marlowe's own account, the most stubborn person who ever lived. But she showed up. Every conference. Every ER visit. Every 2 a.m. when Marlowe asked, again, why her parents had died in a fire before she was old enough to remember them. They loved you, Odessa always said. That's all you need to carry. It wasn't much of an answer. It was the only one Marlowe ever got. By 23, Marlowe was 2 semesters from a nursing degree, working nights at a diner, coming home to care for a grandmother whose heart was failing faster than either of them wanted to admit. Odessa died on a Tuesday in March, Marlowe holding her hand. Her last words weren't sentimental. They were strange and urgent in a way that didn't match a woman slipping away. Don't ever let them see it, she said, gripping Marlowe's wrist with strength a dying woman shouldn't have had left. Not until you're ready. Promise me. See what, Grandma? Odessa's grip tightened once more. Promise me. I promise. I promise, just stay with me. But she was already gone. Grief arrives with a bill attached. Within 2 months Marlowe had missed rent twice, dropped her final semester, sold almost everything that wasn't nailed down. She was filling out paperwork at a Hartford temp agency when the recruiter looked up and said, actually, I've got something. Live-in position, private estate on the coast, pays well. You'd start Monday. Whose estate? The Ashcombes. Weston Ashcombe. Ashcombe Industries. Marlowe knew the name the way most people in Connecticut did, attached to hospital wings and news segments about earnings. She had never expected to know it as the name on her own paycheck. She took the job. She didn't have the luxury of asking questions. The estate sat on 11 acres over Long Island Sound, more windows in the house than Marlowe's whole childhood building. Staff quarters were a converted carriage house, small, clean, roughly the size of her old bedroom, which felt less like a downgrade and more like the first stable ground she'd stood on in months. Presley Ashcombe found her on day 4. You're new? Yes, Marlowe. I don't need your name. I need you to understand something. Presley crossed her arms. My father hires people who disappear into the walls. Not people I have to think about. Can you do that? I can do that. Good. Presley pulled a folded linen off the shelf and let it drop to the floor, stepping over it on her way out. Redo that. It's crooked. It wasn't crooked. Marlowe understood, even then, this wasn't about linens. 3 weeks in, during a lunch for 11 guests, Presley called Marlowe into the dining room in front of everyone. My sapphire bracelet is missing. Presley's voice carried, deliberately. It was on my dresser this morning. You were the only person in my room. I didn't touch your jewelry, Empty your pockets. The room went silent. Guests set down their forks. Marlowe felt her face go hot as she turned her apron pockets inside out, a folded 20, a hair tie, and her nursing program ID, which slipped free and fell to the marble floor. A guest's shoe came down an inch from it as she reached for it. Nobody moved to help her pick it up. Nobody except Ruth, who crossed the room, knelt, and handed it back to her without a word, her jaw tight with fury she wasn't in a position to show. Search her room, Presley said. The household manager did. Found nothing. Presley's expression flickered, not embarrassment, something closer to inconvenience, before she said, fine. Get back to work, and turned back to her guests as if nothing had happened. For days later, Ruth found the bracelet in the pocket of Presley's own evening bag while sending it to be cleaned. She said nothing to Presley. She told Marlowe, quietly, in the kitchen that night. She knew where it was the whole time, Ruth said. I'd bet my life on it. Then why? Because she wanted to see how you'd handle it. Ruth's mouth was a hard line. And because some part of her needed a reason to not like you before she had a real one. Marlowe didn't understand that sentence yet. She would, eventually. 2 weeks after the bracelet, unpacking the last of Odessa's belongings she'd finally had shipped from storage, Marlowe found a photograph tucked into the lining of an old suitcase. It showed Odessa, younger, standing in front of a grey stone house Marlowe recognized immediately. She'd walked past it 100 times in the last month. In Odessa's arms, an infant, sleeping, one small hand visible against a blanket. On the back, in handwriting Marlowe didn't recognize, 3 months. The photo's corner was scorched, as if it had been pulled from somewhere it shouldn't have survived. Marlowe sat on the floor of the carriage house for a long time, staring at it. My grandmother worked here. Before me. And she never said a word. She didn't tell Weston. Not yet. She told Ruth first. Ruth went very still when she saw it. Where did you find this? In Grandma's things. Ruth, do you know whose baby this is? Ruth's eyes filled, and she didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Ruth. I think, Ruth said carefully, you need to ask Mr. Ashcombe about a little girl named Ivy. Weston had been in Singapore 6 weeks and barely registered. His household staff had changed by the time he returned in late September. His first real conversation with Marlowe happened by accident, at 11 at night, in the kitchen. You're the new girl, he said, distracted. Marlowe. And it's been 12 weeks, so I'm not sure I still count as new. He looked up properly, caught off guard by the directness. Fair enough. Where are you from? New Haven. My grandmother raised me. She passed a few months ago. That's how I ended up here. Something in his chest tightened. I'm sorry. Thank you. She turned to go, and her hair shifted off her shoulder, the mark, pale and crescent-shaped, visible for half a second before she disappeared around the corner. He stood in the kitchen a long time. 3 weeks later came the dinner party. The birthmark. The glass. That night he pulled a manila envelope from his desk he hadn't opened in a decade. A photograph, an infant, a crescent birthmark, and on the back, Ivy, 3 months. Ivy had been his brother Desmond's daughter. Died with her mother in a fire in Bridgeport when she was under a year old, a tragedy that ended what was left of Weston's relationship with Desmond, who blamed him for a company argument he believed had distracted the family the night the fire started. Desmond left the state and hadn't spoken to Weston in 22 years. Weston stared at the photograph, then toward the staff quarters. Coincidences like this don't happen. He didn't believe himself even as he thought it, and by morning he'd called a private investigator he'd never once used for anything personal. Marlowe sat on the floor of the carriage house for a long time, staring at it. My grandmother worked here. Before me. And she never said a word. She didn't tell Weston. Not yet. She told Ruth first. Ruth went very still when she saw it. Where did you find this? In Grandma's things. Ruth, do you know whose baby this is? Ruth's eyes filled, and she didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Ruth. I think, Ruth said carefully, you need to ask Mr. Ashcombe about a little girl named Ivy. Weston had been in Singapore 6 weeks and barely registered. His household staff had changed by the time he returned in late September. His first real conversation with Marlowe happened by accident, at 11 at night, in the kitchen. You're the new girl, he said, distracted. Marlowe. And it's been 12 weeks, so I'm not sure I still count as new. He looked up properly, caught off guard by the directness. Fair enough. Where are you from? New Haven. My grandmother raised me. She passed a few months ago. That's how I ended up here. Something in his chest tightened. I'm sorry. Thank you. She turned to go, and her hair shifted off her shoulder, the mark, pale and crescent-shaped, visible for half a second before she disappeared around the corner. He stood in the kitchen a long time. 3 weeks later came the dinner party. The birthmark. The glass. That night he pulled a manila envelope from his desk he hadn't opened in a decade. A photograph, an infant, a crescent birthmark, and on the back, Ivy, 3 months. Ivy had been his brother Desmond's daughter. Died with her mother in a fire in Bridgeport when she was under a year old, a tragedy that ended what was left of Weston's relationship with Desmond, who blamed him for a company argument he believed had distracted the family the night the fire started. Desmond left the state and hadn't spoken to Weston in 22 years. Weston stared at the photograph, then toward the staff quarters. Coincidences like this don't happen. He didn't believe himself even as he thought it, and by morning he'd called a private investigator he'd never once used for anything personal. Marlowe went to Weston with the photograph the same week his investigator was already digging. She didn't get the chance. Presley found the photograph first, face down on Marlowe's nightstand while checking on a supply delivery, which was a lie, because Presley had begun watching Marlowe's room ever since her father's strange behavior started. She recognized the house instantly. She recognized, with a cold drop in her stomach, what the photograph could mean if it reached her father before she understood what she was dealing with. That night, a diamond pendant went missing from Weston's private safe, a combination only the household manager, Presley, and, as of that week, Marlowe, who'd been asked to retrieve documents from it once, technically had access to. Marlowe was called into the study at 10 p.m. The household manager stood beside Presley, arms folded. We found your fingerprints on the safe, Presley said. You asked me to open it, in front of you, 3 days ago. That's not what the security log shows. Presley turned a laptop screen toward her. The timestamp on the access log read that same night, 9:14 p.m., not 3 days ago. Presley had deleted the original authorization message and altered the entry before anyone else had reason to check it. As far as this house is concerned, you were in that safe alone tonight, and something is missing from it. That's not what happened and you know it. You're dismissed. Effective immediately. Pack your things. Where's Mr. Ashcombe? Unreachable. And even if he weren't, household security falls under my authority while he's traveling. This is my decision to make. Something flickered behind Presley's eyes, not triumph, something closer to panic dressed up as authority. You have 1 hour. Marlowe packed in silence, hand shaking, the scorched photograph the last thing she placed in her bag. Ruth caught her at the gate. Wait. Ruth pressed a sealed envelope into her hands. Your grandmother gave me this the week she left this house, 22 years ago. Made me swear 2 things. That I'd only give it to you if you ever ended up back under this roof, and that I'd only hand it over the day someone in this family tried to send you away before telling you the truth first. Ruth's eyes were wet. I've been carrying it in my apron pocket since the night you showed me that photograph. I was praying I'd never have to use it. Headlights swept the driveway. Weston's car. He was out before it fully stopped. Where is she going? I dismissed her, Presley said. She stole from the safe. She did no such thing. Weston looked at Marlowe, at the bag on her shoulder, at Ruth's hand still gripping hers through the gate bars. "Nobody leaves this property tonight. Everyone. Inside." Marlowe read the letter alone, in the room she'd almost been thrown out of an hour earlier. "Marlowe. If you're reading this, you came back to that house, which means the world made its choice before I ever got to make mine again. Your name isn't the one you were given at birth. Your father is alive. I've known it every day for 22 years, and I let you grieve two people who never died. At first I hid you because there were real people asking real questions about who stood to inherit what, and a baby standing between grown men and a fortune is not a safe place to be. That part one don't regret. But the danger passed years before I let it show on my face. I could have found a way to tell your father you were safe without giving up where you were. I didn't. I told myself it was still protection. Some of it was. Some of it was an old woman who had already lost everyone else in her life, terrified of losing the one person left who was hers. That was love. It was also selfish, and I never found the courage to say so while I was alive to be forgiven for it. One more thing, so you understand what you're carrying. Your mother told me, before she gave you to me, that the mark on your neck was the one thing no forged paper could change. A birth certificate can be rewritten. A name can be rewritten. That mark couldn't. Anyone who'd held you as a baby would know you by it in a heartbeat, which meant it was the one part of you I could never let anybody see until you were strong enough that it couldn't be used against you. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to know the whole truth of it before you decide what to do with the rest of yours. Grandma." Marlowe read it once, fast, the way you rip a bandage. At the word selfish, she covered her mouth with both hands, not to stop herself from crying, but to stop herself from answering a dead woman out loud. Then she read it again, slower. And a third time. By the signature, she whispered "Grandma" before she could stop herself. It was the first word she'd spoken since opening the envelope. It was also the moment the tears finally came, quiet, and over quickly, the way she'd learned to cry when there was no one left whose job it was to comfort her. She folded the letter once, then again, pressing the crease flat with her thumbnail, and did not cry again that night. Weston came to her an hour later with the photograph she'd shown Ruth, now in his own hand. Ruth had brought it to him the moment the gate incident ended. He didn't lead with explanation. He set his photo of baby Ivy beside hers on the table and let her look. "I ran a DNA comparison," he said quietly. "Just the two of us. It came back 68% probability of an avuncular match. High enough that I can't ignore it. Not high enough to be sure. There's someone who can actually answer this. My brother." "Then call him," Marlowe said. "Tonight." Desmond arrived the next afternoon, grey-haired, a man who'd spent 2 decades making himself hard to find. He stood in the doorway of the study and looked at her for a long moment. "You have your mother's eyes," he said. Marlowe's expression didn't soften. "You don't get to know whose eyes I have." "Not yet." Desmond's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Before you explain anything," Marlowe said, "before any of the legal reasons, any of the danger, any of it, I need you to answer one question honestly." "Ask it." "When did protecting me turn into abandoning me?" The room went silent in the way rooms go silent right before something true gets said. Desmond's hands, folded in front of him, began to shake. The threats were real for the first 2 years. After that, he stopped. Started again. After that, I told myself I was still protecting you. But I think, if I'm honest, somewhere around your 5th birthday, I stopped protecting you from danger and started protecting myself from having to explain why I'd waited so long. So you were a coward. Yes, Desmond said, and something in his face broke apart when he said it, no defense, no qualifier. For a very long time, yes. Marlowe nodded once, slowly, like a piece of information being filed away rather than accepted. Now you can explain the rest. Desmond told it plainly. The year Ivy was born, their father had just died, and a lawsuit from an estranged branch of the family was contesting the will, alleging Weston had manipulated their father in his final years to cut them out. in the middle of that fight, a fight Weston himself had chosen to escalate rather than settle, believing settling would look like weakness to the board, investigators working for the other side began asking pointed questions about every Ashcombe grandchild, about who stood to inherit what if something happened to Weston. You didn't cause the threats directly, Desmond said, looking at his brother now. But you decided fighting that lawsuit mattered more than making it go away quietly, and that decision is the reason people started circling my daughter like she was a line item. Weston's face went pale. He didn't argue. Ivy's mother got her out 3 weeks before the fire and took her to Odessa, the one person with no legal tie to us, no financial motive, nothing that made her a target. The fire that night was real. Ivy wasn't in it. We paid for the paperwork. Let everyone believe she died with her mother. And you never came back, Marlowe said. Not a question. I never came back, Desmond confirmed. Even after the lawsuit settled 2 years later. Even after there was no more danger to hide her from. I let a good woman carry a lie alone for 2 decades because facing what I'd done felt harder than not facing it. That's the truth, and it doesn't get smaller no matter how I explain it. Marlowe set Odessa's letter on the table between them. She said the same thing about herself. That the danger passed and she kept hiding me anyway, because she was afraid of losing me. She looked at both men. The two of you built my entire childhood out of the same fear, and neither of you ever talked to each other long enough to notice. Neither man had an answer for that. Weston called Presley into the study last. The safe, he said. There was never a theft, was there? Presley's composure, which had held through the entire evening, finally gave out. No, she said, quiet now, none of her usual sharpness left in it. I panicked. I found the photograph in her room and I didn't understand it yet, I just understood it was dangerous, and instead of asking a single question I decided the safest thing was to make her disappear before you ever found out what I'd found. That's not an explanation, Presley. That's a confession. I know. Her voice cracked. I spent my whole life believing being your only daughter was the one thing nobody could take from me. Then she showed up, and instead of finding out who she actually was, I decided the easiest thing was to treat her like she was no one. Because if she was no one, I got to keep being the only thing that mattered in this house. Marlowe, standing by the door, said nothing for a moment. That's the first honest thing you've said to me since I got here, she said finally. Presley didn't try to defend herself further. She just nodded, and for the first time, looked genuinely afraid of what she'd become rather than afraid of losing what she had. A confirmatory DNA test between Marlowe and Desmond came back 3 days later. 99.9%. No more uncertainty left to hide behind. Marlowe didn't move into the main house. She stayed in the carriage house through the winter, on her own terms, while she and Desmond built something slow and unglamorous out of 2 decades of silence, no forced warmth, real anger sitting right alongside real effort, neither pretending the other wasn't there. Weston restructured the company's succession to formally recognize her, not as a headline, but as a fact on paper she was free to use or ignore. He funded her final 2 semesters without condition. She let him do that much, and no more, for a long time. Presley didn't lose everything. She lost the assumption that the house existed to protect her position above everyone else's, and she spent the better part of a year proving, unevenly, that the confession in that study hadn't been the end of her reckoning, just the start of it. The following spring, at her nursing school's graduation, the seat beside Marlowe's family section sat empty where Odessa should have been. Desmond sat 2 rows back, unsure, until Marlowe turned and waved him forward. When her name was called, it wasn't Ivy Ashcombe. Marlowe Odessa Bishop. Desmond's face changed when he heard it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Afterward, he found her outside. You didn't take the name, he said. I'm not rejecting where I came from, Marlowe said. I'm honoring who stayed. She reached up and moved her hair back from her neck, the crescent mark visible in the afternoon light, uncovered for the first time in front of all of them at once. They gave me one life in secret, she said. The rest of it is going to be mine. In public.